He has a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, 2 little girls. He said, these ones are different. These ones are not just to rent for your party. He said their mother wants to sell them for $10,000 each. He got me on the phone with the mother. She was negotiating this. And she said, I need you to make me a promise. I thought this promise would be, take good care of my girls. Keep them safe. She said, if you're ever done with them, I need you to be done with them. She wanted us to kill her kids. These 2 little girls, knowing that they were being sold by their mother to be trafficked in a brothel, held on to Andy because the guys that were buying her to take her to a brothel was a better option than staying with their own mother. The thing that haunts me the most is that operation fell apart because of some dirty cops and some politicians that were involved. I have no idea where those kids are today. There was 40 plus children that we had identified over a period of 14 missions. That entire operation fell apart.
Paul Hutchinson, welcome to the Roller Coaster Podcast.
Thank you. Super grateful to be with you, Tyler.
Yeah. Appreciate you being here. You've done a lot of things in your life, and I think most of them intentionally are good things in the research that I've done about you. Vice would beg to differ, right? They produced an article, and the headline was something like Sound of Freedom producer touches naked breast of undercover victim while undercover on a mission. What do you want to say about these accusations from Vice and some other major news outlets about you?
I'd do it again today. Straight up. To rescue those 23 kids, I don't regret any of my actions. Not one moment. You know, people can point fingers. Oh, you know, he was here, and I can show reports telling you she was actually over 21. That's irrelevant. That's trying to find kids. Through our foundation and others that we have helped to fund and start, well over 7,000 children are back with their families. I ask people, okay, on that date, how many kids did you rescue? You know, so I for a long time it was heavy. You know, I'm like, you know, I'm getting phone calls from New York Times wanting to expand on the story and the piece, and, you know, Newsweek and all this crap. And I'm like, oh, you know, I literally was putting my life in danger. I was in front of what were some of the most dangerous men that I had ever met, ever, my whole life. All the undercover work that I had done, these guys were some of the most dangerous. And I can tell you the details of the story. There was a big guy, he's like 7'3". Everybody knew he had killed people before. And technically he was testing. No, I had operators next to me. Rule number 1, you're never alone with a minor. I was not alone with a minor. And manager of the strip club comes down. I'm married to a 49-year-old Colombian who looks like she's 25. These girls looked like they were 25. I knew they weren't minors, but that was irrelevant. What was relevant is that I was there with people who were known in the area as child traffickers. I was called by the head of the federal police in Mexico to identify where the trafficking was coming from, and we did exactly that. Took down some of the most dangerous pedophiles, the most dangerous traffickers in Mexico. So answer is, I would do it today. You know, trafficker brings out one, boom. Now, did it ever happen again? No, it didn't. 70 undercover child rescue missions 10 years later. You know, we had figured out ways where I could say, you know, my boss will kill me and my whole family if I taste the candy before the party, whatever. But I was in the darkest places on the planet. You don't find kids that are being sold at the Ritz-Carlton. You know, these are some pretty dark places. Yeah. And with really dangerous people.
There's a lot of people out there that don't believe child trafficking is actually an issue. And it's actually, after you watch The Sound of Freedom, for example, and the way that I personally was moved by that film, it's hard to believe that this isn't a big issue, right? So what do you think is like most misunderstood about actually what's happening out there with child trafficking?
I think the most misunderstood is sadly what was portrayed in the movie. People think that child trafficking is, a child taken from a healthy home and put into a container ship and gone to another country. Yes, that happens, but the majority of children who are being taken and moved around come from broken homes, a broken foster care program, runaways. But a bigger surprise to a lot of parents is the fact that a huge percentage of children who are being sold worldwide for sex sleep in their own beds at night. And either their parents have no idea that it was going on, or their parents were involved. People will leave the Sound of Freedom movie. They'll be like, "Oh, I want to go do something. I want to go rescue kids." The worst thing you can do is go to Mexico and try to go undercover. You're going to get arrested. You're probably going to get shot, right? The best thing you can do is go home and hug your kids. People are like, "Well, how's hugging my kids help?" Well, like I said, majority come from broken homes. You need a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say when something's off. When they can say, "Hey, Dad, I don't like it when we go to this babysitter because she's showing us pornography and says that we should trust her more than you." Or when you tell me to hug Uncle Harry, or when we go to this cousin's house, her dad, he's like, he leaves the door open when he's showering, and then he sits late at night with us and plays truth or dare. These are, and online it's even more dangerous than this, right?
Yeah.
We think that the dangers for our kids are lurking behind some dark alley. No, the most dangerous thing for our kids is in their backpack. It's in their back pocket. It's their access to the internet and unrestrained. If you literally are posting everything for anybody to see, you need a relationship with your 12-year-old where he can very comfortably come to you and say, "Hey, Dad, I screwed up." "Really? What happened, son?" "Well, I was online on a gaming thing. I met a 12-year-old girl. She sent me some pictures. I sent her some. She encouraged me to send some more video stuff. And now she's wanting money. I'm thinking it might not be a girl. It might be a 45-year-old dude." Probably is, right? This is sextortion has happening all the time. Kids are committing suicide over this. And we had multiple rescue missions where the children that were being sold by the traffickers were actually in their own beds the night before and were going back to their beds that night, and their parents had no idea. One of them was a little 13-year-old in Acapulco. She was being sold by her aunt. Her aunt was babysitting her, showing her pornography, giving her drugs, told her, "You're going to lose your virginity anyway. If you lose it to these wealthy Americans, we'll pay you $500. She was charging us $5,000, and this is the first step. And then they have some dirt on these kids, and then they turn into more and more and more. So you walk out in the United States. I don't care if you're in an affluent neighborhood or if you're in an apartment complex. You walk out your front door. You look left, you look right. There's a very high chance that one of those doors is a dangerous place for children. Because here's the statistics. Yes, there's 10 plus million children being sold in child trafficking. However, literally 1 in every 4 women that you know have admitted or remember the fact that they were abused sexually as a child. Now, that's just the ones who remember. At our healing retreats, it's closer to 50 to 70% of women as a child went through this kind of horror. Now, for men, it's a little bit less. It's 1 in every 5 at some time in our life. But even them, 1 in every 4 of them, 25% of them, it was under the age of 10 years old in their own homes. If there's that high percentage of abuse in our community, of children who have been through that, of adults that have been through that as kids, then you have to understand that the perpetrators are in our neighborhoods, are in our families. 92% of children who go through this, it was a familial person. It was a family member, it was a neighbor, etc. And so again, the most important thing we can do to help our kids, yes, you've got to make sure that when you're traveling to Cancun, you don't let them run out in the street by themselves or whatever. But the most important thing you can do is have a healthy relationship with them where they know what's inappropriate and what's not, where other adults aren't having secrets with them outside of you, where you're not having them having sleepovers at friends' house that you don't know the parents, you don't know the background, you don't know the brother or the cousin, whoever else is there. Because we pull these kids out of hell in the rescue work. And we know that they've been through that trauma, and we can immediately get them the help and the love that they need. You have somebody you've got a cousin, you got a family that was abused by her uncle or her grandpa and told that she can never say anything or the family will hate her. And this was supposed to be somebody that she trusted, that was supposed to love her. Then that trauma gets buried, and it gets buried so deep that the average age of somebody talking about that abuse is 52 years old. And most men never talk about it at all. So, that's there's a lot of information there that we can go down any of those roads. But after 10 years of undercover and 70 missions and recognizing really where the problems were coming from, I realized that it's not just Thailand, it's not just Colombia, it's not just Mexico. It's right in our neighborhoods.
I think this is probably, as a father of 4 young kids, my son is the oldest, and then I have 3 daughters. They're 9, 7, 5, and 2. This is probably the thing I think about as much as or more than anything else that I think about in my life, which is, how do I build trust? How do I instill the right values? How do I set the right tone, the right example? So what sort of practical things can a father like me be thinking about when building trust with his sons and daughters?
I'll tell you a statistic. This is a fun one. So we'll go into the trust in a second. Having those super healthy, open relationships with them at a young age, helping them understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate touching, what's the private areas, et cetera, et cetera. But the number of children who are in these situations, percentage-wise, goes right through the roof when you have a broken family. Okay? So statistically, in the United States, you have a 50% chance of getting a divorce. 1 in 2. And what if I could tell you could do one thing every day? It's going to take you 2 minutes a day, maybe 5, that could take that number from 1 in 2 to 1 in 1,000 in your chances of having a broken family. Would you want to know what that is?
Absolutely.
That's huge, right?
Yeah.
Here's what's crazy. Super simple. Pray together with your spouse every day. Doesn't have to be anything special. Not our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, whatever. Simply holding hands and saying, hey, God, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this day. Help us with this. Taking the time even to meditate and to listen to that voice of truth. That connection with your Creator together with your spouse takes the statistic from 1 in 2 to 1 in 1,152. I've never seen a study that even comes close to that. That one thing, just praying together every day. Whatever else you were working through, whatever else, that one thing every day, from 50% to less than 1 in 1,000. And then if you pray together with your whole family, that's even better. So, wow. Again, this isn't a religious thing. I don't care what religion somebody is a part of. This is turning to God together with your spouse every day. Will hold that family together, and you can work through all the most difficult things. I've said so many times that the most valuable tools you can give your children is a relationship with God and healthy self-esteem, which kind of comes together. That self-esteem is a self-love. And now I just promoted prayer, and I'm going to bash on religion a little bit, right? The problem is if that self-love is conditional in any way, if we're trained to believe that for in any way that the infinite unconditional love of God is based on things that we have to do to gain that love, then that is also going to come into our relationships with our parents and everything else. Helping your children see that they could screw up in whatever way. It doesn't matter. And you're going to love them. Now, yeah, they might go to jail for drunk driving. They might have to, there's consequences of our actions, but the love from you as a parent will never change. Ever, 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 ever. And instilling that will give them that self-esteem, that self-love that they need, that when something happens, some uncle says, we should go quiet here. Don't tell anybody about this. We're like, oh, no way. No, I love myself way too much to let you do that to me. I'm sorry, but I'm going to talk to my dad about this. Healthy self-esteem in a relationship with God and unconditional love. That's the answer right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to think about there. One of them, I think, which is a big one, which applies in many areas of our life, not just interactions with our kids, but it's how we as fathers and mothers react when they mess up. I'm trying to be really thoughtful about that, right? When one of my kids does something they know they're not supposed to do, and either I catch them in the act or they come clean, if I react with shame and ridicule and, essentially a message of you're not enough, do better, versus a message of love and forgiveness and you've got this, encouragement, right?
Yeah.
I think that those patterns over time, they recognize those and then they feel more and more comfortable as we model that, hey, it's okay. It's okay to mess up.
Yeah.
I think the best thing there's this book that was written by Brené Brown, if you know some of her work, and it was actually recommended by our couples therapist, my wife and I. We were going through some things a few years ago where, we grew up in a very orthodox faith in the LDS faith. And, I was having a faith crisis. I was going through some extreme doubts with the faith and, didn't agree with a lot of the things we were asked to do. Right. So I did things differently. And that wasn't, it was hard for my wife. And so our therapist recommended a book called The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. And the whole idea is that perfect parents ruin children. And it's actually great when you mess up as a parent, as an adult, because it gives you this spectrum of empathy and understanding to be able to react the right way when your children come to you with these sort of things, right? And so I feel grateful for a lot of the mistakes that I made. I think they've allowed me to be non-judgmental, to not act in a way that would be damaging to my children when they mess up. And so, you agree with that?
In every way. In fact, I want to touch on the judgmental part for a second. Some of the listeners might get mad at me for this, but I'm just going to go there. I've recognized over the years in going to the darkest places of this world, I came to one powerful realization. If I'm ever, no, let me start by saying this. Guys, don't judge me for this. I've literally put my life in danger hundreds of times to ensure they never hurt innocents again. However, I recognize that if I'm ever judging another human being, whether it's for cutting me off on the freeway, whether it's for stealing money from me in my company, whether it's for yelling at me in a grocery store line, whether it's for selling me a child, if I'm ever judging another human being, there's a 100% chance that I don't have all the facts. I don't know. I don't know if that guy that's cutting me off on the freeway, if his daughter's in the hospital. He might just be an asshole. But even then, can I judge him for that? I don't know his childhood. I don't know if his dad was super abusive. There's so many things that I don't know. There's one person in the universe that knows all the truth, and it isn't me, right? Yeah. The guy stealing money, maybe, he was whatever. The guy selling me a child? I don't know. I don't know if he was raped as a child himself. Now, here's the thing. He still needs to go to jail. We still need to put him in a place where he can't hurt innocents again. The guy cutting me off on the freeway, speeding down, he still needs a ticket because we need to protect the innocent from their behaviors. But we can do so from a place of compassion. I can, if a rat's in my kitchen, I don't have to yell and scream and hate and whatever. I can remove that rat so that we don't infect the food and the family, but I can do so not from a place of super negative energy and judgment. Can I judge that rat? Really? The rat's being a rat, right? And so I can remove it from that place. And so it's helped me in so many things. I've recognized that the majority of traffickers were trafficked themselves as children. The majority of the perpetrators had unresolved trauma themselves. Now, again, that doesn't make it okay because the majority of people who went through that kind of trauma as children themselves become protectors. Most of my operators were victims of that kind of trauma as a child. And they grew up saying, no, I will not allow that to happen to a child on my watch. I will literally put my life in danger to ensure the safety of those kids. And, but at the same time, I found myself every mission wishing that I could have gone back in time, pulled those kids out before they're ever abused in the first place. And I recognize that even if we did that, we pulled these kids out of hell 10 years before, if there was still a demand, more kids would be sucked back into that space to be able to fill that demand. So I'm okay, how do we fix the demand? How do we fix this? Well, I realized if I did have a time machine, I would actually go back in time before the trafficker stepped down that road, before the perpetrator stepped down there. I would talk with him or her and I would say, oh, what is going on in your life? What happened in your past that's brought you to this point where you think that in any way it's okay to go down that road? And in that conversation, what we don't have is a time machine. What we do have is hundreds of millions of people who are holding on to things that don't serve them. That if we can come from a place of compassion and love to our adolescents, our young adults, and have open conversations with people about what happened in their childhood, help people release those things that are creating the anger issues, the anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, and those addictions continuing with bad choices into the point where they're passing on that trauma to others. If we can cut that off beforehand, break that chain before it gets to that point, we save millions of children.
Yeah. I think it's pretty rare for a child to just, in their first opportunity, be pulled in and to be trafficked, right? Grooming is an essential part of this process for these sick people, right? Yeah. So what are some of the signs of a child that's being groomed? What are the things that we can look out for?
If your 12, 13-year-old is super outgoing and then suddenly she's not, don't think that it's just puberty she's going through. Those emotional changes, especially that age, the average age of a child brought into this situation is 12 years old. That's average. And so if suddenly they're becoming more recluse, if their joyous energy is being darkened, figure out where that's coming from. These perpetrators will use a lot of fear-based stuff, guilt, shame, fear, people are going to hate you, whatever. And this, that fear frequency, that fear energy will show up in every area of their life. And so recognizing when those things start to show up will be a telltale sign. And they may show up immediately. Well, that probably was a situation at a friend's house where they were playing, some truth or dare game, or, doing some weird whatever. And, or they were approached by somebody, or they maybe exchanged some stuff on the internet, etc. So having healthy, open relationships with them, letting them know that your love is unconditional. There's nothing they can do, because these guys will make these kids think that in some way it's their fault, right? They'll control with that shame and guilt. Oh, you did this. Your parents aren't going to love you for this. You should trust me. We're friends here. And so be careful. Be careful with any adults that start to step in. I tell kids early on, if any adult ever, here's a red flag sign. This is an emergency sign. If any adult says, hey, this is a secret just between us, whatever it is, there's no secrets outside of you and your parents. Yeah. So those are super healthy conversations for you and your kids.
Is there commonalities between, I say men, I know it's men and women, but we'll say men that get into the business of sex trafficking and men that are predators? Is it almost always one-to-one, right? Because these are technically slightly different things. A man that's trying to lure my daughter into sexually abuse her versus one that's trying to lure him in for trafficking.
Yeah. A lot of these traffickers, especially in second, third world countries, they're businessmen who, had some trauma themselves. And, there is a common thread with all of them that I found. That common thread was arrogance and greed and lust, that, looking at another human being as less than the divinity that they are. And here's one thing I'll touch on too. Everybody who's listening to us today has seen pornography. Just because you've seen pornography doesn't mean you're going to become a pedophile. However, almost every one of these guys at one point started out with a hardcore addiction that led to something harder. And people are like, oh, I'm not addicted. Are you? Give it up for 2 years and tell me you're not addicted, right? And the problem is with pornography is that it's a progressive addiction. Just like any hardcore drug, many times people need something harder to have that same fix, quote unquote. People are like, no, mine's not progressing. Oh yeah, it probably started out years ago with the swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated. And then you needed something harder. And so then it was the Victoria's Secret, lingerie stuff. And then you needed something harder. And then it was booby pictures. And then you needed some harder, and it was full nudes. And then you needed something harder. So it was videos. And then you needed something harder. And it was, all kinds of racial stuff or rape movies, or it goes on and on. Guys, it progresses. And here's what happens. The very second that you take a woman from a divine feminine to an object, you start going down a dark road, right? And it's insatiable. The divine intimacy between you and your healthy spouse is beautiful. It is connecting with each other, connecting with God, but your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between reality and fantasy. And when you're on your computer and you're masturbating, you're fantasizing about somebody who's not your spouse, your subconscious mind thinks that you already cheated, right? And energetically, especially if you're dealing with a lot of shame and guilt based on religious upbringing, that shame and guilt will feed into it. And guys are like, oh, I'm in the privacy of my own office and I'm not hurting anyone. Well, the mind of us as men, when we're in that energy versus holding that for our spouse, and it's hard. All of us do. I was addicted for many, many years. I was in super unhealthy relationships. I'm the pot calling the kettle black if you think I'm pointing fingers anywhere, right? And but it's so important to understand the progression, because here's what happens. For some guys, needing a little bit harder to have that same fix, for some of them, it's a little bit younger. Pretty soon they're fantasizing about things they wouldn't have even thought was attractive 5 years ago. And then they're acting out on these horrific fantasies. This is what's creating this tsunami of demand that is putting all of our children at risk because people aren't getting the help that they need to break free of some of their addictions.
What are some of the biggest challenges that survivors face?
Shame, feeling like they're not good enough, feeling like in some way that because of what happened to them, they're going to be judged, that they can't fit in, that they can't be loved by God, by others, by their future spouse. I think it's important to understand that, our everything of our past, everything that we have done, everything that has been done to us, everything of our past can be washed away. They're both going to require the help of God to do so. And those chains of our past are, they're not shackles around our wrists. They're literally chains that we're holding on to ourselves. And we simply need to make the choice to release them, to release. And the part of that releasing is forgiveness. In our healing retreats, one of the things that I do is I take people into a deep meditation. And we do it through breath work, and I take them in from the beta into an alpha wave and into a theta. And in that deep meditation space, we can go a few different directions. One of them is in that divine guidance, but one of them that we really help people with in the beginning is what I call cutting cords. And cutting cords with anything that isn't in alignment with your highest and best self. And I do it through a process that I say this wrong all the time. It's ho'oponopono, right? It's a Hawaiian term for this prayer of forgiveness and release. It's basically this. It's the high level overview is, I'm sorry, I forgive you, I am grateful, I love you. So there's those four there. And so here's what happens. We'll put somebody in this meditative space, and in that space, we'll have them bring in, they'll set this energetic, emotional protection around them, this light of love and truth from God that is protecting them. And then in this meditative space, have them bring in either a relative or a person, anybody who has caused major pain, major heartache. And we'll have them read their rights to them. Tell them, this is what happened. This is just get it all off your chest, release, 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 release. And then, even before saying, I forgive you, we have them say the words, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for holding on to this pain for this long. I'm sorry for hating you for all of these years. I'm sorry for anything that I have done to cause you pain in any way. I'm sorry. And then say the words, I forgive you. Now, forgiving somebody doesn't mean that you condone their actions. It is a release of that toxicity, so you're not holding on to it the rest of your life. Because, you holding on that person may not even remember how abusive they were, or that words that they said, or whatever it was in your junior high school years when they told you were fat, or whatever. They might not even remember it today. And you're holding on to that. It is you forgiving another person is not ensuring that person's salvation. It has nothing to do with their relationship with God or anything else. It is all about releasing that toxicity for you in your life so it no longer drives you. So I'm sorry. I forgive you. I am grateful. I am grateful. I'm grateful for the man that I am today because of those hard things. I am grateful for the lessons that I learned. I'm grateful for any of the good that I got from you. I'm grateful for you bringing me into this life, whatever it is. I am grateful. And then I release, cancel, and I release and cancel all negative cords between me and you. Any negativity, I release it in, and I release it with love. I imagine it in a pink cloud of light being flown away. Because if you're trying to fight this negativity with hatred and energy and fear and all of this negativity, it just brings it in. It fuels those challenges. But if you release it within this spirit of forgiveness this forgiveness, this spirit of I'm sorry, and release from a spirit of love, from a spirit of gratitude, then in doing so puts you in a place where those things no longer have a hold upon you. And I'll even do this with previous versions of me. 10 years ago, I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effing Hutchinson, and I had toxic relationships. I was doing things in my family life, etc., that are so not in line with the highest and best version of me. And so in that meditative space for me, I have to bring in that past version of me and tell him, hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for, the hard relationships that were in your life and all that pain you had to go through. I'm sorry that I didn't have the ability to give you the tools you needed at that time. I forgive you. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the lessons I learned today. And I release any ties between me and Paul F. and Hutchinson so that those things no longer have a hold upon my future. Everybody, not just the victims of trafficking, but everybody could go through this process of releasing those things that no longer serve them.
So there's some real work. Obviously, anybody who's a victim of child sex trafficking in any way, shape, or form, they're going through some serious trauma, and they have a lot of work that they need to do, right? So, I think later we're going to talk just more about some of the modalities that you would recommend people explore or think about. And some of these are things that, you're deeply involved in now, and resources that you can provide to these people. I want to talk about Operation Underground Railroad and the Sound of Freedom movie. Do you feel like the work that you did there really mattered?
I don't agree with a lot of the ways that it was done. But did it matter? Yes. So here's why. There's a lot better ways to provide resources to these third world countries and giving them the help to identify trafficking, et cetera. You don't need to have the sensationalism of a whole bunch of cameras there at every mission and everything else. But back at the time of Abraham Lincoln, it wasn't the guys helping to rescue the slaves that created the biggest difference. It was actually people like you. It was the podcasters. It was people like Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was the media. It was the podcast of the age. It was the feature film of the age, right? And it created an awareness with good people of what was going on in the South. In fact, years later, when Abraham Lincoln met her, he said, he shook her hand. She was a little short lady. He says, "So you're the little lady that wrote the book that started the big war." So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we couldn't have these conversations. Especially, over a dinner table, it wasn't polite dinner conversation to talk about, child trafficking, whatever else. But it was all in the darkness, even the stuff that, protecting our kids against the neighbors or whatever else. It was something that a lot of people didn't talk about. And that's the reason why it was so prolific. These predators were allowed to operate in the darkness because nobody would talk about the darkness. And so it needed to happen that way. It needed to happen where we had people out there with putting together the documentaries. Yes, a lot of the Navy SEALs and Green Berets that I worked with, they left early on with OUR because they're like, wait a minute, this is all about one man's ego and one company's logo, right? And I stayed on longer than most because I saw the value, even though it was other operators that were doing the work, and even though we had one guy that would show up at the very end with a bunch of cameras and say, this is what was doing and everything else, I knew the importance of the awareness. And this is the reason as well with the Columbia story and a couple others where we're like, okay, if this is really how to fix this problem, how do we do it? We need to go big, not just a bunch of documentaries. So, Tim and I went in with Sony and Lionsgate and Paramount. We went in with these big guys with this story. They were super interested. But I started recognizing that there were things within Hollywood that weren't fully in line with what needed to happen to fix this. In fact, they wanted full literary control. They could have put Jim Caviezel and my character in a gay sex scene in the middle of the movie and having some children involved with it. All this stuff, we couldn't do anything about it, right? And so we're like, no, this needs to be the story of the real missions. We took 8 different missions and put them all together into one storyline. And I will say this, just full disclosure, right in the beginning, that first mission that I did 70 missions over 10 years. That very first one, Cartagena, me and some of the other operators were told, hey, somebody needs to be front and center. Somebody needs to be on CNN, ABC, everything else, needs to be the face of this. But it, of course, would be very dangerous for that person who's the face of it to actually be doing the work on the ground, right? And so we all agreed with it. We all signed off. We said, absolutely, we will do the work. We will go undercover. We will not be seen anywhere. You have your face out in lights. You tell the world what's going on, because for us, this was about eradicating trafficking. And if one person's face and one company's logo got put out in front of the world, if that's going to help one child, so be it. And I was okay with that. So is there better ways to do the operations? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we moved into about 5 years ago when I moved away from that foundation, and we started working with a lot of these real operators who have been doing operations for many, many years. Former Green Berets, Navy SEALs, we continue to fund their operations, but the awareness was absolutely necessary.
Yeah. What's your biggest regret in being involved with Tim Ballard and OUR?
I try not to live life with regrets. I mean, I look back there, I think, okay, I would have changed that or would have changed that. And I wish I would have known this. But the reality is, I wouldn't have met my wife if it wasn't for that. You know, she was a donor to the foundation, to OUR, for many years. But and I was in Haiti. I had done 12 undercover missions in Haiti. And sadly, I was at a funeral for one of our operators. And, I tell people meeting a beautiful Colombian actress is kind of cool. But when she's donating her time in an orphanage in Haiti, that's amazing. I look back and I'm like, oh, I feel sad. I feel sad that I think that there's a lot of hatred coming from the Tim side towards my side. In my meditations, I have to get to a point where I forgive everyone. The business partners who stole millions, the people in my childhood who did horrible things, and I have to bring them in. I have to feel that infinite love of God flowing through my heart, releasing all judgment, or else I can't get to that deeper level in my meditation. If I'm holding on to that judgment, if I'm holding on to that toxicity, I can't get there. And so for me, it's actually been a super beautiful exercise to have people who we had to cut cords with, and the cord cutting with him, 5 years ago when we made the separation, it was a rough road. We had, and people can look this all up online. There was a big whiteboard meeting at my house, and on this whiteboard, it was thus saith God type of a thing. I've been meeting with the first presidency, and basically they told me this: I have to tell you, all of your money should only go to these foundations, and it shouldn't go to these other foundations that you've been funding, these Navy SEALs and stuff, and you should only be focused here. And why? Because we're going to take the sizzle of the rescue and bring them into the covenant. Now, you growing up LDS knows what that means. And I'm like, listen, I love God. I have a healthy relationship with my family members who are still members of the Mormon Church, but that's not what this is about. We're not gonna video the kids in their horrible situations and bring that sizzle of that rescue just so that we can bring people to timballard.com, just so that we could bring them into the Mormon Church. Yes, I believe that there's part of that true, meaning, can we show the world the darkness so that we can help them see the light? But that light isn't specifically designed for one theology. This is bringing people into a healthy connection with God, of releasing those things that aren't serving them. Yes, I believe that this is something that we can unite humanity over. It doesn't matter if somebody is voting right or left, or they're black or white, if they're rich or poor, it doesn't matter. We can all come together on this one thing. God's children are not for sale, period. And so that's, in that way, yes, is very uniting. But, there were some separations there, but I don't hold any regrets. I really don't. I'm incredibly grateful for where I am today because of that.
I think, when you go through, you did 70 of these missions, I'm assuming that there were certain moments that will be imprinted on your heart forever that probably created some trauma and some things that you had to work through. Will you describe in detail maybe one or two stories things that you saw that you'll never forget that you're going to have to work through the rest of your life?
I was in Dominican Republic, and there was a man who was an escaped convict from the U.S. He was a really bad man, and he had been trafficking children for quite a while. And he had showed us some of the kids that he was trafficking, and then he said, "We need to meet." I says, "Okay, let's meet." And he comes in, and he has a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, 2 little girls. He said, "These ones are different." He said, "These ones are not just to rent for your party." He said, their mother wants to sell them for $10,000 each, thinking that we had a brothel strip club thing in Miami that we were going to take him to. And I remember he got me on the phone with the mother. She was negotiating this. And she said, "I need you to make me a promise." I thought this promise would be, take good care of my girls, keep them safe. She said, you need you to make me a promise that if you're ever done with them, I need you to be done with them. I never want this to come back on me. She wanted us to kill her kids if we were ever not going to be prostituting them. I remember Andy was one of my operators. These 2 little girls, knowing that they were being sold by their mother to be trafficked in a brothel, held on to Andy. I remember one of them was she held on to his side and the other one on this side. Because the guys that were buying her to take her to a brothel was a better option than staying with their own mother. The thing that haunts me the most is that operation fell apart. There was some dirty guys in the government that were involved with some of the traffickers. At the day of the mission, when they were supposed to bring all the kids, they had to call off the entire thing because we had local cops that were trying to. It was a disaster, and we had to get rushed straight to the airport and get out of country. And 2 days later, I get a picture. Now, I didn't have the phone number of that mother. I was trying to stay in contact with this escaped convict. 2 days later, I get a picture on my undercover phone from one of his henchmen. He's in the hospital with tubes all over him, and one of the other traffickers shot him. Had no way of getting back with that mother. I have no idea where those kids are today. That's hard. Not only that, but there was 40 plus children that we had identified over a period of 14 missions. And we were putting all of these pieces together. That entire operation fell apart because of some dirty cops and some politicians that were involved. I had another one I'll never forget. We were in Haiti, and we had to build trust with some of the guys on the street. I'll tell you the story because this is actually beautiful. I back up just a second. So my son had gone and spent 2 years in Texas on a mission. While he was there, I had divorced his mom and left the church. So he came back wondering if I was still a good guy. And I 2 days after he got back, I put him on a Gulfstream jet, flew back to Texas, picked up Glenn back, and flew him to Haiti with us. So, sorry, crying will do that to you. And because Glenn wanted to film some of the kids that were in some of the orphanages. You know, I was with that previous foundation when we were working with them, and we went, and I put my son on the plane, went there just because I wanted him to see the good work that I was doing. Just because I wasn't married to his mom and I wasn't going to the temple didn't mean that I was a bad guy. And so we were filming some of the kids in the orphanages, and then the former Homeland Security agent comes to me and he says, Paul, he said, I've had teams on the ground for the last 5 days. They haven't found any leads, any traffickers. You're the best I have. Can you go out with them? So I knew that meant I get no sleep that night. So I told my son, hey, stay here in the hotel. I'm going to go out, do some work tonight. This is a new team. Big Navy SEAL guys and tattoos, and I'm just me. And they'd never worked with me before. At this point, I had done a lot of missions and gotten really good at finding the kids. And it was 2 a.m. We hadn't found any traffickers. I said, guys, can I take lead? Are you good with that? They're like, yeah. Tim said, you're really good at this. I want to see what you do. I said, okay. I said, I need you to follow exactly what I say. I said, first things first, I need you to understand that I believe in God. I said, most people believe in a supreme being. Some people call him the universe or, Heavenly Father or Jehovah or whatever. I said, it doesn't matter. I said, God exists and cares more about these children than you and I ever could, and knows exactly where they are. So if you're okay with it, even if you're not, I'm going to start out by asking for some help. So here we are, downtown Port-au-Prince, Haiti, in the darkest, most voodoo-infested place in the Western Hemisphere. And we take off our hats and offer up a prayer. And then I said, now I need you to understand how I see fear and faith. I said, most people think that faith is going to church and asking God to fix things in their life that they don't believe are going to be fixed. Let me say that again. People think that faith is going to church and asking God to fix things in their life that they don't even believe are going to be fixed. That's not faith. It's blind hope, right? Faith is a principle of power. It's next to unconditional love. It's the most powerful law in the universe. And it's simply this. It's the unwavering conviction that what I want to have happen will happen. The problem is people have a hard time with unwavering conviction about anything. Now, John chapter 5 says, ask in faith, nothing wavering. Well, we have a hard time with that unwavering part, right? Should I marry this woman? Should I start this new job? Should I start a podcast? I think that a lot of those things, God says, hey, you know what? We'll co-create with whatever it is you want to bring into your life. But I believe that God sees what's happening with these children, and says, no way. If I've got good people willing to do something, I'm going to pave the way. And I saw more miracles in this work than any other time in my life. And so these guys are like, okay, dude, whatever. And I said, it's also important to understand that fear and faith don't exist in the same person at the same time. The reason behind it is that in a way, they're the same power. People that believe good things will happen actually attract that to them. People who believe bad things happen actually attract that to them. And I said, because of that, because fear and faith can't exist in the same person, I said, in the same subject, I might do some things tonight that you might think are a little bit stupid. I said, because I feel safer here, 2 a.m., Patientville, outside of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, than I do sitting in my office in Salt Lake City, right? So these guys are like, okay, dude, whatever. I says, okay, just drive. They're just driving. And I'm writing a book now called Are You Listening? With My Hand on My Heart. Not Are You Listening with My Hand on My Ear, but Are You Listening Here? And I have a lot of how I help create a company, all of this stuff through tuning in to that guidance. And so I'm just tuning in. I says, okay, guys, stop right there. He says, what, the motorcycle game, the dark alley? I said, yeah, right there. He says, what are you going to do? I says, that guy knows something. I can feel it. He says, this is a dangerous area. We need to survey the area. I says, no, we don't have time for that. In fact, you guys are going to intimidate him. You stay here in the van. I'm going to talk to him myself. He's like, oh, are you stupid, Paul? I said, listen, I don't have 2 weeks to find. I said, I'll buy you pink panties when we get home. Right? We don't have 2 weeks to find out who's selling kids. He knows something. So I went out and I walk up to him. And he pulls up his shirt and there's a gun that's tucked right in here.
Yeah, he's like, what's up?
Yeah, what's up? And I'm just listening. I pull out a bill. I can't remember if it was a 20. I think it was a $100 bill. I pull it out. I give it to him. He says, what's that for? I says, that's for you. You keep it. I says, I have another one for you if you can help me with something. I got a friend, the U.S., got a lot of money. And he wants me to set up a party for him. He likes 10-year-olds. He's like, your friend's fucked up. I said, yeah, he is. He says, I know who can get it done. I says, I know. Boom, he gets me on the phone with this lady. She's running a strip club. She was selling kids on the side, making more money than her club. She connects us with a guy by the name of Dolo. Dolo was also escaped from prison. He connects us with this lady. She's a big, heavy-set girl. She had been selling kids for more than 10 years. There's this door about 4 feet wide, 7.5 feet tall, red, rusted door. Dangerous area of town. She sticks a key in this door, opens it up. Dirty, kind of a hallway, dimly lit. Multiple cell doors down the left-hand side. These rooms didn't have windows. They were 5 feet wide and about 6 feet deep, each one of these rooms. She sticks a key in one of these doors, opens it up, and it's not even a bed. It's a concrete, it's a steel plank that's held to the wall with a chain. And there was a blanket full of holes, dirty blanket that was sitting on that. This child was sleeping. To the left was a concrete block. There was a little girl sitting on that block, her feet in the dirt. This girl was taken when she was 7. Her parents were killed in the earthquake in Haiti. Nobody knew she was alive. She was now 14. She had been sold 20 plus times a day for 7 years. That little girl didn't speak one word after we rescued her. And her first words that she said were, I didn't think anybody would come. What makes me mad is that every man that walked through that door for 7 years was there to harm her. Me and Andy were the first men to walk through that door that didn't have that intention. She's now learning to dance. She's with a healthy family, back in school. You know, seeing that darkness can make you give up on God, make you give up on humanity. But fortunately, I was able to see it for what it is. This is not a battle of flesh and blood. Right out of Ephesians, this is the battle against the principalities of darkness in the highest places. This is a spiritual battle. And I think we're going to win. There's a lot of good people in this world. And I think that the world, most religions believe that we're going to go through a time of dark turmoil and then 1,000 years of peace. They kind of got that right. And I think we're there. But God's not going to come and just wave his hand and we're all going to be nice to each other. This is something that every one of us have to take responsibility for. We're all listening to this saying, well, I would never do that to a child. I would never do that. Yeah, but is your pornography addiction continuing to the point where you're exploiting? Here's the thing. The majority of women who are online, the majority of them are actually being trafficked. Yes, those addictions are contributing to this toxicity. Even the women online, people are like, oh, I was in Los Angeles or New York and I was online and on erotic.com or whatever. And these girls are, they're independent. No, they're not. No, they're not. 95% of the women who are online claiming that they're independent are not. They're being trafficked. Here's the thing. I had to recognize this. I call it, well, the easy way to understand it is tension transfer. You go to work, you haven't fixed your shit. You're like, okay, and let's say that I go and I yell at some employee, right? And he goes home and he yells at his wife. And his wife, the son comes home from school and she gets mad at him for whatever reason. And then he kicks the dog. Literally, the kicking of that dog was a tension transfer that started with you and I for being out of integrity, right? Now let's just pretend. Let's pretend like what we didn't know is that guy had been abused as a child. Let's say that abuse led to a lot of other really negative behaviors that he continued with. Some sexual deviancy, some hardcore pornography addictions. Let's say that his hardcore pornography addictions had progressed to the point where he's now looking at some illegal things. Let's say that he's also satisfying his hole in his heart with alcohol. And let's say that his wife just left him. And let's say that this is the weekend that he gets his 12-year-old daughter and her little cousin. Now, you and I, in that tension transfer, in yelling at that guy at work, it didn't just end up with a dog getting kicked. It ended up harming that daughter or that cousin that was at his house. Every one of us need to look in the mirror. I love the story of the man that's just sitting on the couch and he's sitting there and he's like, he's reading his newspaper. His little boy walks in and he's like, Daddy, I'm going to play baseball. Will we play baseball? He's like, oh no, I'm busy. Oh, I'm busy. You're not busy, right? He's out. He needs to fix his shit is what he needs to do, right? So his little boy, a few minutes later comes back in, Daddy, it's beautiful outside. Can we play ball together? His dad turns the page of the paper and there's a map of the world there. Some advertisement, whatever. He's like, oh, I got this. He tears out this map, tears it up in little pieces of paper and throws it on the floor. He says, son, you need to learn your geography. You tape together every single one of those countries exactly where they need to be, all the states where they need to be. You do that perfectly. Tape it all together. I'll go out and play baseball with you. thinking it's going to take a couple hours for the kid to look up the picture and figure it all out. But it's like 5 minutes later, a little boy comes back. Dad, I got it. All perfect. He's like, what, did your mom help you? You know, how did that happen? The little boy, he turns it over. He says, oh, there's a picture of a man on the other side. I just put the man together and the whole world came together. So many times we like to look externally. Let's fix this law. Let's fix these people. Let's fix this. But how many of us take a look in the mirror and say, what do I need to do to heal what I need to heal? So that my kids are in a safer place, so that my neighbors are in a safer place, so that my employees at work end up feeling that love, that healing from God flowing through me to them, rather than that toxicity that's going to end up in attention transfer that could hurt another person.
You're standing in this doorway and you see this little girl, the hefty woman. Do you remember her name?
Cho.
Cho.
C-H-O. Cho.
So Cho is standing there with you. She's been doing this 10 years. She's obviously a very dangerous person. What happens next? Like, how do you go from standing in that doorway to ultimately saving this girl's life?
She opened up multiple doors.
You and who? Who were you with?
This was me and Andy McCovens. He went by Andrew Weston's undercover. I was Paul Stone.
And he's a badass. He's a
badass
Navy SEAL.
Holy shit. No, he's not a Navy SEAL, but he's it was funny how I'll tell you how Andy came in, because it was beautiful. I had been doing some of the work, and he came into my office and he said, Paul, he said, I've heard what you're doing with these kids. He said, I want to help. I said, great. That would be amazing. He said, I want to fund a mission. What does a mission cost? I says, well, the average is about $2,000 a child. It's an average mission, rescue 10, 12 kids or whatever. So it's about $25,000 to rescue, to run a mission. So he takes out his checkbook and he writes a $25,000 check right there and he hands it to me. He said, now I want to go on the mission with you. I said, brother, you can't just buy your way on a mission. This is incredibly dangerous. I pushed the check back to him. I says, you can't just buy your way on a mission. He says, you put everybody at risk. He pushes it back. He says, you keep the check for the foundation. He said, and you tell me exactly what I need to do. He said, I don't care. I don't care if it takes me 10 years. You tell me whatever training I need to go on one of these missions. And I asked him, I said, so have you ever had any hand-to-hand combat? He says, well, I've done this, that. I've done some escape and evasion. I says, have you ever heard of Krav Maga? And I said, one of the top Krav Maga. Now, Krav Maga is Israeli Special Forces hand-to-hand combat training. It's the most lethal on earth. Every move, they don't breathe, they don't talk, they don't see, right? That's done quick. One of the top trainers in the world happened to live in Salt Lake. His name was Joseph. He's one of the only ones that qualified to go back to Israel and train the trainers, right? Badass. I says, Andy, you go there and train with him. And after a couple of years, whenever it is, when Joseph says you're ready, I'll take you. 3.5 months later, Joseph calls me. He said, Paul, he says, Andy has been in here 2 to 3 hours a day, sometimes 6 hours, training all day long. He said, he hits like a freight train. He said, I've never seen anybody. He says, he's probably safer than most of your Navy SEALs because he's also good in communication and everything else. And so, and Andy had gone through some trauma himself as a child. And because of that, was a powerful protector and literally wanted to put his life in danger, whatever it took to save the kids. It was a calling to him. So this Andy has now done 22 undercover missions with me. So it was just me and Andy there at this time. And because really the connection with Cho wasn't that first night with the SEALs out there with the pray thing. This was, we connected with some people. We left. A couple weeks later, I went back in with some of my other team guys. This was Andy. And we had worked our way up to what we call a level 3 trafficker, the ones that physically hold them. So we built a relationship with Cho. In fact, we had gone back in with his brother, Andy's brother, badass. His name is Aaron. I talk about it in the Sound of Freedom book. He's like 6'4". And at one point, we were in a position where we couldn't get out of a very dangerous neighborhood. There was a truck that was parked in the way, and our car couldn't go through. Only motorcycles could go through. And literally, Aaron got out of the car, boom, I talk about this in the book, and moved this freaking truck, moved it out of the way so that we could drive past. It was, badass, right? So these guys are awesome. So we built relationships with multiple traffickers over a period. It was over a period of a couple months. It's sad that when you see the kids that are there, you know that but they've been trafficked for a while. You've got to take down everything. I was sick and tired of this, of trafficking continuing to come up in Haiti. We wanted to cut the head off the dragon. And in this one, we got to the very top. Cho and some of her people were right at the top. It ended up being where 4 corrupt judges in Haiti were involved with this, right? So we bring them all together. There was actually this is the one where Tony saw it. There was some celebrities that wanted to see missions and stuff that were done in real life. And you can't hide people like that. So I had a friend who had a big yacht, and we had it parked off the side. And we had Tim was in there, and Tony was in there, and some of the Navy SEALs and stuff were there. I went out with me and Andy, and we connected with all of the traffickers and brought all of the traffickers. And this was 34 children. Now, they represented hundreds of children, but just the ones that we could fit in the cars, we brought to this sting operation. It was a beach that we had rented. And, this whole story, you can see the background of it in Operation Tucson. There was a documentary about it. Now, the majority of that work, we didn't have cameras because we were 2 a.m. in downtown Port-au-Prince, but you can see the culmination of that rescue where you see my face blurred out. If you didn't know who I was, you'd hate me when you watch that documentary because I'm sitting there laughing with the traffickers. And we bring the kids where they're on the beach there. And then I tell the traffickers, listen, we're going to go see the big boss on the yacht. No guns, no knives, no problem. All right. So we take all of their weapons, put them in a little box, get on the dinghy, go out. Undercover cameras on the yacht where we're having this conversation. Tony's back there with this big fake beard and stuff, and he's listening to everything. So, this was powerful because this is where he saw it firsthand, where 70,000 children have now been rescued because he was involved with the work. And so then we went back to the beach. And the children, we had put them in a little cabana, gave them drinks and everything else there. The traffickers, we went in with in this building, and we were negotiating with them, saying, okay, what's going on, and how many of the kids can we do this, and then we're going to do this, etc. And then boom, the doors break in, and agents are coming in from all sides. We all get arrested. Me too. I'm on the ground. I'm getting huffed. Now, they ran out of handcuffs. There were so many traffickers that they ran out of the handcuffs with the traffickers that were there. They put zip ties, not little ones. I can get out of little zip ties. We're talking big fat ones and behind my back. Now, the scary thing is that the agent who was arresting me, because of the fact that we were so high level, the only people that knew I was a good guy was the head of the federal police. These agents didn't know I was a good guy, right? So right before an operation, we send all of our luggage and stuff to the airport. I keep my passport in an inside pocket because they, instead of taking me to the jail, they take me straight to the airport and boom, we get out of country. Well, so this agent was on top of me and he's patting me down and he feels my passport in my inside pocket, pulls it out and throws it on the evidence pile on the bed with all the trafficker stuff. I'm laying there. I'm like, that's my real passport. I can't really say anything. They get me up and then they take out, and as soon as we go outside the door, boom, I feel something hit me on the side of my face. And then more and more, the locals had found out there was a child trafficking party going on. They were pissed. So they're throwing rocks at us. Right? So the officer's got his hands over the top of my head, boom, rushing me out. It puts me in the back seat of the chief of police who knows I'm a good guy, right? And so boom, the locals are boom, boom, pounding on the outside of the car, and boom, he takes off and gets out of there. So we get out of there, and he says, hey, I have handcuff keys. I said, well, I have a problem. I says, I've got zip ties. Do you have pliers or a knife? He goes, I don't have that. I just got the handcuff keys. I said, well, we have a bigger problem. I says, my passport is literally there at the evidence pile with all of the traffickers. He says, that's a war zone. I said, I know. He said, well, we have to wait until everything gets back to the police center. So we do. We wait till he gets there and get my passport, get on the plane. It was a beautiful moment for me because, Tony's like 6'9", massive hands, and he's big old clapping and stuff. It was a beautiful moment and spent time with him all the way back and built a great relationship. Well, 2 weeks later, 4 federal judges let those traffickers out of prison. I mean, we'd been working on this case for months and let them out of prison saying, now they got paid $80,000 to be let out. To put that in perspective, in the United States, because the average income in Haiti is like $1,000 a year, that's worth $4.7 million in US dollars if that was equivalent here. So they paid these federal judges a bunch of money to get let out of prison. And they're back on the streets a couple weeks later. And the story that those judges said, the reason they let him out is that the real bad guy got away. It was that American that was working with him undercover. But they didn't say undercover. They said it was that American. And it wasn't Paul Stone. It wasn't Paul Black. It wasn't Paul Steele. It was Paul Hutchinson. Literally, what I didn't know is that they had taken my passport and on the way to the police center had entered in all of the stuff on the computer. My name, my real me was there. And so when the federal judges had the entire case, boom, Paul Hutchinson becomes one of Haiti's most wanted. So we fly the first lady, we fly the diplomats to the U.S. because I couldn't go back in there, show them the entire case. I give them all of the video stuff. I was still working with O'Yoran with Tim at the time, and he invites them all, and we're talking all around the detail and stuff of that. And the chief of police, he stands up, he says, I don't care if I lose my job. I don't care if I lose my life. I'm going to clean up the corruption in my country. Went back in, arrested the traffickers again, took down those federal judges, and that was the beginning of what ended up being a massive fight in Haiti, which ended up with the assassination of the president, the gangs that are running things. This is the battle between good and evil, and sadly, that was a country that went the dark side. But we rescued those kids, got them back to their families, etc. So it's a war.
I want to talk about, before we started this, you talked about these retreats that you're putting on, and these seem to be deeply meaningful for you, and I think the impact that they have in many people's lives. What do you want to share about these retreats that you're putting on?
First of all, let me take you back to where I was before.
Yeah.
We touched on it a little bit. I was 10 years ago, I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effing Hutchinson. I had built this massive company. My house had 10 bathrooms, 8 private suites. At a point, I was living there by myself, right? I have 8 private suites in my house. I've got 3 kitchens, 7 fireplaces, and a basketball court in my basement. I'm in Utah. So what better thing in Utah than to build at the side of your basketball court, build a stage with DJ booth stuff and put stripper poles in it, right? I had stripper poles on my stage. This is the me back then. This is the me that got recruited to do undercover work in the beginning, right? So I was, and that energy worked in the beginning. This is what when I was coming in the beginning, I was the rich guy that was paying for it. Over time, the missions that we just talked about were ones where this is after my transformation, where I was now working the deep cover stuff. I wasn't the ego, arrogance, greed, lust type of energy, guy with the money. But that's where I was. And for the first year and a half, 2 years, that's where I was. And I got a phone call. We were blowing through undercover operators. We had guys with 300 missions in Afghanistan that were already had PTSD from serving in the military. Green Berets that one mission undercover with us, seeing a menu with children's faces and a list of prices of the things that you could pay for, their PTSD is off the roof. So we were blowing through operators. They couldn't continue with this. And I got a phone call from 2 of our guys. One of them, Andy, I talked about before with the mission in Haiti and others. And the other one was a guy by the name of Jimmy Rex. Jimmy had done 13 missions with me and Andy had done 22. And they said, Paul, do you trust us? I said, yeah, I trust you with my life. Literally, when we're in these missions, I talk and you make sure I don't die. They said, you need to come to this healing retreat. I don't need to heal. I'm Paul effing Hutchinson. Everybody wants to be me. They're like, no, your kids don't talk to you. You're on your second marriage, headed for a divorce. You fight with your wife every single day. You think that her bringing extra girls into your love life is going to make you happy? You think that one more party is going to make you happy? You think that one more car and one more, I had 2 helicopters. Who the hell needs 2 helicopters, right? You think that one more thing is going to make you happy. I'm like, okay, maybe you're right. I'm kind of miserable fighting every day with my wife. That would be nice to not fight all the time. And I said, so what are they doing? They says, well, they said, brace yourself for this. They said this doctor has been working with some different types of plant medicines. And what do you mean plant medicines? They said, well, things like psilocybin. And I'm like, wait a minute, those are Schedule 1 drugs, right? You know, isn't things like psychedelics, those are Schedule 1 drugs? You know, you can't take those. Those are dangerous. That's dangerous like cocaine, because cocaine's a Schedule 1 drug, right? What I didn't realize was that psilocybin was safer than table sugar. Literally, you could take more table sugar, you would die before you take that much in psilocybin, right? There's never been a case of addiction, not one. There's never been a case of overdose, not one, ever. And when used with a trained facilitator, can create 10 and 20 years worth of therapy in 1 to 2 days. And so for me, I didn't need a lot of therapy. I didn't have a lot of childhood trauma. My trauma was self-imposed from massive success at a young age and addiction to sex and a loss of a connection with God. And that experience was the most transformative experience of my life in every way. It was the most beautiful, horrific. It was beautiful and horrific at the same time. What it did for me is I like to say it thins the veil. You know, there are certain things that help us to go beyond our 5 senses and connect with the love of God, connect with the energetic connection we have with each other, with humanity. You know, when we're in our ego space, we're super blocked from that energetic, loving connection. You know, the veil of forgetfulness. When we come to this earth, we don't remember being with God. We don't remember being brothers. We don't remember how connected we are. We don't remember any of that stuff. And we're living through faith, and there's certain things we can do in our prayer and our meditations, other things that can start thinning that veil. Where for me, what happened was pure empathy, meaning in a good and bad way. I felt in my heart, in my soul, in everything about me, my entire body was trembling because I could feel the pain that my children felt when I cheated on their mom, as if I was them. And I couldn't even breathe, Tyler. It was like Satan had his foot on my chest and I was 600 miles in the earth. It was so heavy feeling that pain that I had caused. And then I felt the pain of the somebody was at my party and slept with the cheerleader and broke up his marriage. And then the ripple effect of that, where, you know, maybe a year later, his daughter gets knocked up, or his son ends up on drugs because they're in a fatherless home, or whatever it was. I recognize, you know, my words when I was at work and I was speaking in an anger way or out of integrity and ego space. I was, you know, the guy at the grocery store that maybe was a little bit slow in bagging, and I just was, I'm a fag that myself. Whatever it was, my actions and how they were affecting the people around me. And then I felt the joy of the kids that we helped rescue, and as if I was them when they were reunited with their families. And the ripple effect of every one of my actions was so profound that I had what I call an ego death in every way. And then I guess I hadn't quite killed my ego, because I remember I came out of that experience, and not out of it. I was in the other room and I was with a facilitator. And there was a statue of there were some Greek gods. There was Zeus and Poseidon, and there was like Atlas holding the world on his shoulders, right? And in my ego self, I'm there with, I said to the facilitator, I said, I feel a lot like Atlas, Now at the time I had 4,000 employees of the company that I had founded, right? So I'm like, yeah, I feel like Atlas, I'm holding the world on my shoulders. But you see how God made me so strong, look at the ab muscles of Atlas. God made me strong enough to hold the world like that. And she's kind of smiling, and my ego self still coming through, right? She's like, Paul, she said, I admire that you're seeing some traits in those Greek gods. She says, but you know as well as I do that those were mythological gods. She said, what about your relationship with him? And she points at the statue I have of Yeshua, of Jesus. And I said, oh, I don't qualify for a relationship with Jesus. She said, well, why not? I said, well, because I don't keep all of the commandments. All the things I'm supposed to do to be in the presence of God. And I said, when I left the church of my youth many years ago, my bishop told me that unless I was rebaptized into that church, that I wouldn't have the Spirit of God with me. And she said, well, do you really believe that that's true? I said, well, no, I do a lot of charity work. I try to help where I can, and I try to do good in my world. And she said, why don't you take some time to work on that relationship? So here I'm somewhere between 3 and 6 grams of mushrooms. I can barely stand, right? And I reach up and I try to grab this statue down. She says, let me help you. She helps take this statue down, and I sit in the beanbag holding this statue for the next 2 hours, having the most beautiful conversation with my brother. And the science behind this is important for people to understand. When we're little children, we're in a state of hyper neuroplasticity. Our brains are very, very impressionable. You're learning things all the time. Literally, you can be sitting in a room and your mom's speaking Spanish and your dad's speaking English here, and you can learn 2 languages at the same time. You're just all this information. And 95% of our life is run by our subconscious mind. And that subconscious is something where, sadly, if something in our youth, if something is implanted there, somebody says something, you're not enough, or your relationship with God or with your family is based on your performance and not on true love, or maybe your uncle touches you, whatever it is, if there's something that's traumatic there, sometimes those things get super buried. And after that state of neuroplasticity, the rest of your life, it takes 21 days to create a new habit. Well, the psychedelic experience, the psilocybin, creates a temporary state of hyperneuroplasticity. You're very impressionable. And a trained facilitator can use that opportunity, to take out the imperfections. It's like you've got this gold, this beautiful piece of gold, but there's got a bunch of imperfections in it. And you heat it up into that state of neuroplasticity, and you can very easily, the imperfections come to the top and you can pull those out, and then it can go back to this perfect form. That's what happens in that state. Now, this is why it's dangerous. Not only a bad idea, but it's dangerous to go to a rave party and go get high with your friends on mushrooms. Because if you're in an environment where you've got rap music going here and somebody, with their girlfriend, yelling over here, and you've got, whatever it is, an orgy in that other room, you're in this state of neuroplasticity, and you've got toxins in the air. You're not purifying anything, right? Yet if you can come into an experience with a clear intention, with the right music and the right container and the right people and the right facilitator, you can literally create 10 and 20 years worth of therapy in 1 to 2 days. And so after that, I started bringing in some of our undercover operators, guys with Navy SEALs and Green Berets with 300 missions, with anxiety and depression and PTSD. And boom, we were able to help them get off their medication, help their wives get off their medication, create real long-term change. We started bringing in women who had dealt with severe childhood trauma, raped by their uncles, sold by their mothers, etc. So over time, I went into the Attorney General in Utah. I said, brother, I have seen this work so effectively. I said, I don't know if you know my background, but in my early 20s, my company, my first successful company, I sold it for $20 million at 29 years old. Now, most of it was restricted stock, but it was a company that helped people overcome anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addictions. And it took 12 weeks with a personal coach, 1 to 2 hours a day to make that happen. Moving forward, now I could see that same magic happen within literally 24 to 48 hours. So I told the Attorney General, I says, I'm going to bring this to Utah. You can either arrest me or tell me how to make it legal. I was joking, of course, I don't want to be arrested, but he laughed and he says, well, let's figure out how to make it legal. And so we took some LDS bishops, 5 of them, five either former or current bishops, and some together with Jimmy, and some legislatures and some doctors to Jamaica, where it's fully legal there, because in church doctrine, it says you can't drink coffee, can't drink tea, can't drink tobacco, but it doesn't say anything about psilocybin. It just says you can't break the law, right?
Yeah.
And so taking them there, and every single one of them said this could change everything about my congregation to help people with all of this toxicity. Sadly, our governor decided he was going to veto our bill. Understandable, until it's approved on a federal level. And so that's what we're working with. I've known RFK for about 10 years, Kennedy Jr., and he's one of the things on his list is to try to help decriminalize the use of these things in the U.S., but it's so important that people do it right. Meanwhile, we have a retreat in Colombia. We have, and in Costa Rica, we have another one coming up in Mexico. We have a bunch of them. We're going where it's legal and where we can use some of these sacred medicines in a way that can help people really change. People can go to liberatinghumanity.com and get information on not only how to keep your kids safe and the Sound of Freedom book, but on the retreats themselves and how you can break free of everything that doesn't serve you.
That's beautiful. Why do you think these plants, I'll call them, these very natural things from the earth, why do you think these are illegal in America, but alcohol, which is the most severe toxic poison of all time, is very legal and very accepted and even encouraged in our culture?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is you can type in dangers of alcohol versus psilocybin, and you get this chart at the very, very, very top. Above cocaine and heroin and everything, the very top, and harm to self, harm to others, is alcohol. Second is crack cocaine, and then heroin, all the way at the very, very bottom, with almost zero harm to self and others. The only way you're harming is if you end up trying to drive a car while you're in mushrooms, right? There's so minimal there that sadly in the late 60s, my real opinion of it is there's two things. Is number one, you're not gonna. There was a lot of people that were this whole make love not war movement, right? They were awakened to the fact that we're all connected. We don't need to be going out and shooting people in Vietnam and whatever. That was a big problem. The government realized that they cannot control people with a lot of their fear-based mechanisms if people were awake, number one. And I think that it was by design that they're like, this isn't just a bad idea. This is a Schedule I drug. You couldn't even do research on it for 50 years. We were completely in the dark about these things. That I believe that the reason why we've had such an increase in a lot of the wars and the toxic things when it comes to child trafficking, all of these things, is because of the fact that so many people have not had the tools to heal through their trauma. Mm-hmm. There's a book called The Immortality Key that scientifically goes back and shows how psilocybin was used in the early sacrament in the early church. back 1,000+ years ago, not because people are going to hallucinate, but because indeed it thins the veil. When I say that, it opens up your understanding of the spiritual world in a way where it's really hard to on your own without a lot of prayer and faith, et cetera. And so I think that it was by design to take people away from opening up our minds and being truly awake. If you're going to enslave humanity, like a lot of institutions are, our medical institutions, a lot of our religious institutions, our government institutions, there is more slavery in our lives today than we can imagine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think a lot of it's all control based, and that's why I named our company, which turned into a foundation, I named it Liberating Humanity. That's what it's about. How do we liberate humanity? Well, we have to wake them up first. How do we wake them up? Well, we show them the darkness so that we can say, okay, here's the darkness. Now I've got your attention. Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
What does it look like? What does healing look like? What is changing how I feel about myself and others? What are the tools that I can use to break free of those things and truly liberate my mind, my life from all of those things that are holding me captive?
Well said. Paul, to wrap, I want you to imagine you're in the final moments of your life. How do you want to be remembered? How do you want people to remember Paul Hutchinson?
I had a poster when I was in high school on my wall. It had a bunch of Lambos and Ferraris and had a nice house. And I had a quote that said, "He who has the most toys wins." I now have one that says, "He who has a powerful, positive impact in the most lives wins." I think when I meet my maker, he's going to say, "Paul, I gave you so much. Financial blessings, the ability to communicate, but your greatest gift was that transformation of your heart. And if I can channel the love of God, that infinite, unconditional love of God, through my heart to humanity, whether I do it through podcast and sharing and speaking, or whether I do it through just my actions and interactions with people every single day, the ripple effect of that good is what it's all about." I came from a finance background, and compounding interest is a big deal, right? Did you know that if you spend an entire year, people are like, "Oh, I can't save the world," right? Okay, if I spend an entire year working on myself, becoming the best version of me, releasing those things that don't serve me, and then I spent the next year in my free time mentoring 2 people, helping them do the same, helping them release all of it. If it took an entire year to do that, and if they simply the next year helped 2 more people, and that continued every single year, 2 more people helping 2 more people, it is literally 33 years, and you've helped 8.5 billion people, the entire population of the world, through you just working on that man on the couch, that man in the mirror, starting there, and that ripple effect of good will help heal humanity.
Amen. Let's talk about your book.
So, the Sound of Freedom movie created global awareness, but there's a lot of people that leave that don't have the tools. They don't know what to do, how to fix this problem. So, the Sound of Freedom book, available in Amazon everywhere, is talks about some of the missions. Some of the stories that we shared on this show are all included there. But more importantly than that is tools that parents can use to, number one, keep their kids safe. I go through situational awareness and reading a room and understanding how to identify when children are in distress, a lot of the things that you ask questions on. The last part of the book is all about liberating humanity. What does that look like? How do we how do we make it so that trafficking isn't a problem in the future? What do we need to do individually to help heal? So literally, you can take this whole last hour together and put it in book form, from recognizing those signs in your kids to how to help people heal. It's all there. And the middle part of the book goes through some of the rescue missions, taking the reader through the emotional transformation that I went through in seeing the darkness and then going into the light. That's why I did on the cover, a little girl in the darkness running into the light, because that's what it's all about. Darkness into light.
Excited to read it. Is it available on audio yet?
Not yet. It will be soon. I have to take about a week out and go do a bunch of recording, but I will sign that copy for you so you get it before the rest of the world does. And
amazing.
And super grateful for having me on the show.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Tyler. Incredibly grateful.